Hello and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. Today we're talking about water treatment, 3 different methods of water treatments, which you should definitely use, which you should use if you're a scientist in a lab, and which you should definitely avoid, but which people often think you need for hydroponics. Speaking of hydroponics, it's time for my regular segment now. What does the general public think hydroponics is? Today, we've got Benjamin from Beaumont Leys in Leicester. What is hydroponics?
Hydroponics is the watering of plants that is done autonomously, maybe?
That's not too bad an answer there from Benjamin. Yeah, it's got many of the aspects of hydroponics there. Automation, water, fertigation perhaps, but not soilless cultivation. Anyway, today we're talking about water treatment. And I said there's 3 different methods we're going to go into. And the first one, well, let's talk about why it matters. In hydroponics, plants rely 100% on what you give them in the fertigation solution. There's no soil. So water isn't just the carrier, it's part of the nutrient environment, and impurities, salts, and imbalances in the pH can have a massive effect, and it can cause toxic effects, instability, and interfere with nutrient uptake. So the purer the base water, the more precision you have. So the most common method that people use if they're going to treat their water and remove anything is reverse osmosis, and often known as RO water. And RO water is produced by forcing tap water through a semi-permeable membrane, and it removes dissolved minerals like calcium, magnesium, and sodium. Now, you'll note that 2 of those are essential nutrients, the calcium and the magnesium. So you're actually removing 2 important nutrients, but it's the sodium that's really important. And it's also removing things like heavy metals, chlorines, and chloramines. Chloramines? And that's really why you want to use RO water. The removal of sodium, the removal of chlorine and chloramines, the removal of heavy metals, and the removal of organic contaminants, especially pesticides. Any pesticides that will be in the water, which they are, then that would be great. There are lots of herbicides, especially the molluscicides, that the water companies just can't get out of the water. And that's why often they get banned. It's not because they're poisoning the environment. It's simply because they can't be removed from tap water. So with RO, reverse osmosis, you can remove 95 to 90% of the dissolved solids from there. In hydroponics, RO water is considered the gold standard for maximizing control of nutrient balance, pH behavior, safe use on sensitive and rare crops, and especially good in areas with hard or high sodium tap water. And I think we said previously, the chlorine levels in North America can be a lot higher than they are here in the UK, and the hardness can be a lot higher, and the pH can be a lot higher. So you can have pH of, +8 in some areas. And then even, you hear reports of some towns that are completely abandoned or unzoned because they just can't treat the water because there's so much pollution in the water. And so, crazy situations where you might want to use RO water. What's the main drawback of RO, reverse osmosis water? It's, well, to get 1 litre of product, you have to waste 2 to 4 litres. So it takes 2 to 4 litres of tap water to produce at least 1 litre of RO water. And the other disadvantage is that it strips calcium and magnesium out, so you might have to supplement with more CalMag. So if you're using liquid gold and gold leaf, if normally you're not using CalMag, you might have to add a CalMag if you're using RO water. The other disadvantage, so if you're on a water meter, then losing 4 litres for every litre you produce is another disadvantage. You're going to have to pay for that. It's not just a issue of it going down the drain. Now, there's one major issue that many people get confused with, and it's often they see RO machines and they confuse them with water softening machines. They look similar, they've got similar cartridges. You must never use softened water in hydroponics. Softened sounds good, doesn't it? Like, you think of it as hard water as having calcium, so it must have the calcium removed. And it does. But softened water is treated with ion exchange resin in those containers that you think is an RO water. And that removes calcium and magnesium, which are essential nutrients, but it replaces with them sodium or sometimes potassium, but normally sodium. And that's great for plumbing. It prevents limescale, but it's terrible for plants because, as I've talked about in the past, sodium is toxic to plants. It's the arsenic to plants, even though arsenic is still poisonous to plants, but it's, you get my meaning. It's a highly toxic to plants. You have some salt on your chips, your French fries, it's not going to be an issue, but for a plant, it's the quickest way to kill them is to give them sodium. So it's toxic to roots, interferes with nutrients uptake. You'll struggle to get the plants to absorb water, and even once it's treated, it'll still contain chlorine and chloramines, and you can still have massive pH issues. So even if it feels soft, it can stunt growth and reduce your yields. Never use softened water. Always avoid it if you're growing plants. Even if you're growing houseplants or soil plants, if your water is plumbed into a softener, then try and bypass it somehow for feeding your plants. Now, lastly, what we're going to talk about is distilled water. Now, you've heard of distilled water. It's a bit more old school than RO water. Distilled water is created by boiling water and capturing the steam, then condensing it. So just like RO water, it removes minerals, organics, chlorine, chloramines, pathogens, pesticides. It's ultra pure, but it's often used in lab settings, not in hydroponics. I mean, it will be great for seedlings and tissue culture especially, because it will be sterile, but it's ultra consistent. There's no residues. It doesn't go off like RO water. So like RO water, you have to replace the cartridges every so often, but distilled water is distilled water. It doesn't change in, consistency. There'll be no chlorine or toxic ions, but the drawback is it's time consuming, expensive, energy intensive, and so it's just not required. RO water is better. The only time you'll need it if you were doing a really precise experiment looking for nutrient deficiencies and you wanted to remove all traces of any nutrient or element. So distilled water, it's nice to have, but it's certainly not essential. If you're looking for if you haven't got massive issues with hardness, heavy metals, or organic pollutants, then you could just use a dechlorinator. So something like Dr. Hydro dechlorinator, or if you're growing with liquid gold in the UK or gold leaf in the US, you don't need to worry about dechlorination because it's inbuilt into the technology in the bottle. So, but you can still use it with RO water. Probably best to use a CalMag as well, because you're removing quite a lot of calcium and magnesium by using RO water. So, as I said at the start, water is more than a medium. It's the foundation of your system. Hydroponics starts with hydro, and for good reason, because water is important. Understanding what's in your water and choosing the right purification method gives you control over everything that follows. Don't be the idiot that installs a water softening system to make things 10 times worse and then has to go onto Reddit and say, what's wrong with my plants? Make sure you're using RO water or certainly dechlorinated water as a bare minimum. So if you've got any issues, got any suggestions, then drop me a message or visit Utrema, which is Latin for wasabi.co.uk. And if you found this useful, if you know anyone who's using softened water in hydroponics, then share this episode with them. Just click the share button on your podcast provider of choice. And if you've had this episode shared with you, then you owe the person who shared it with you a very cold drink. Get down the pub. That's enough for today. Thank you very much for listening. That's been Hydroponics Daily.